Now, many of you will obviously remember him from his previous talks, but for the benefit of the newer members, I'll try to outline a little about Howard's background. Now, Howard was born in Swansea at an early age. 1946, he's a resident of the local area. He received a university education studying veterinary science, classics, ancient history and archaeology. He obtained a BA Honours degree in Classical and Ancient Studies at Swansea University and then went on to a postgraduate study in Field Archaeology at Oxford. Now, he spent over 30 years studying and research in the Giza Pyramid complex in Egypt, where he's been a frequent visitor. He's also written many books and produced DVDs on this and other subjects, and has spent much time over many years presenting illustrated talks and lectures on archaeology, Egyptology, Coptic research and current affairs in Egypt. And I was going to explain what Coptic is, but I probably get it all wrong. Now, he's a founding director of the Coptic Research and Resource Centre at Swansea University. And incidentally, I think he's had his own UFO sighting in Swansea, which Emlyn has outlined to us on a few occasions. You never know, you might be able to persuade him to tell you a little bit more about it if you ask him. Now, I know a lot of you thoroughly enjoyed his previous talks when he addressed the subjects of solar anomalies and the Amberlac group and photographs obtained via NASA's SOHO cameras. Now, this evening we'll be talking about who built the pyramid at NECROPOLIS in Giza and for what purpose, and their connections astronomically and mathematically with the Book of Genesis. So please put your hands together for Mr. Howard Middleton-Jones. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can you all hear me? Okay? Good. Well, that was a good introduction. I'll go home now. I think I should show you the slides. Great. Well, I think basically what I'm going to do tonight is take you away from all this cold wind and this Brexit bungle. I won't mention that word. And we'll take a little trip to a couple of deserts, not only on the Giza Plateau, but out in the Western Desert, in Wadi Rayyan, because that is where, over the years, we tried to discover and look for other anomalies associated with the Great Pyramid, and I'll explain why later. But thanks for the good introduction, but a lot of the original work was done by several of my colleagues, all RIP now, unfortunately. I'll introduce them because I think it's important to show you who they are, what they've done, how well known they are, and so you've got some idea of the credibility of the work we've been doing over the last 20-odd years. As I said in the introduction, I have been going to Egypt since about '93. So my last visit, unfortunately, was 2 days before the Great Revolution, and I've never been back. Basically, not because I don't want to, it's gone very expensive, but you can't organise anything. Everything is sort of shut down after 6 o'clock. You can't go meet your friends because the police make roadblocks, or you can't do anything. And I'll show you why we had some problems in 2005, 2006. I was going to show a little introductory video, but we can't seem to play it here. But it was, the idea of that video was to show you who and why built the pyramid, the necropolis, how it all started, where it's going, where man's destiny is going in the future. And basically it was just a free fall of what the idea we're going to build a sort of a new film documentary or series. But unfortunately, due to the revolution and the 3 deaths of my researchers, I'm the only one left. And touch wood, and we never got round to it. I got 30 hours of filming, and one day I'll get down to it was high cinematographic filming, and one day I'll get down to try and edit it all. But it's still a lot of stuff that's never been seen before, because we just haven't been in a lucky position to be in the places and made contacts. So, without further ado, there is one little question I'm going to ask you as you go along. Do you notice anything, or perhaps one or two of you, there's some unique point of the Great Pyramid, and the Great Pyramid, this one here, that one is Khafra, and is often shown as a Great Pyramid just because it's got little It looks better because they've got a capstone on top. It looks smaller, but this Great Pyramid is bigger than that one because it's lower down on the plateau. Now, there's one particular point feature of the Great Pyramid. Does anyone know? And it only occurs in this pyramid, no other pyramid in the world. Does anybody know what that is? Is it? Sorry?
No bodies found in it?
Well, no, there's a lot of pyramids with no bodies, but no, the outside feature. It is they only knew until 1945 when the US Air Force and the RAF flew over it. But in my photograph, and I think I took this in about 97, you can see, what can you see here?
8 sides.
It's concave. It's concave on all sides. And there's a reason for that. And we'll look into that later on. But no one knew about that until well after the war. But you can see it. I mean, but no one really sort of looked into it that much. And these three pyramids come into, we call them the Queen's Pyramids, I call them satellite pyramids. They're quite important to the Great Pyramid as well. Okay, so anyway, that's me. This is one of the rare, I think I've got 2 or 3 of me in 98 slides. I don't like having my picture taken, but Jenny took this one on one of our visits. Just to give you some idea, you've got the Great Pyramid, the Khafra, and Menkora, the smaller one. So you've got 3 main pyramids, as well as the smaller little pyramids around the side. It's pretty quiet that day. It's gone very busy now. And just to show you where it actually is and where we're going, there's Saqqara's, the step pyramid. We look at that because it's important to show you what other pyramids we're looking at. Giza is the suburb of Cairo, and that's where the pyramids are there. And then we're going to take a trip later on, and I'll explain why, down past the Fayoum to Wadi Rayyan, a very isolated Coptic hermitage site where we lived for a week or so, looking for another pyramid in the sand, which we did find, but we couldn't actually get to it because there was a desert-blown dune in the way. But we'll look into that later. So just to remind ourselves, here are the 3 main pyramids. You've got the main pyramid there. You can always tell that one because the boathouse is alongside it, and this is the Khafra, the second one, and Menkora. You've probably heard of Babal and Hancock's idea that the 3 pyramids align to Orion. In part this is true, but basically Alison Moray from Australia, who was one of our colleagues years ago, wrote about all this long before the Babal and Hancock books came out. She's an astrologer in Australia, and in the early 80s she discovered this alignment. And she wrote an article in a journal, astrology journal. Babal, I'm in touch with Babal, and I told him about this. Hancock, I don't see him very much. I only met him once, but I told them that when I read one of the early books, they copied page for page 2 pages of Alison's work and didn't even give a reference. So I did contact Robert 2 years ago and told him about this, and she was going to take them to court and under advice from the archaeological writer of the Times, but unfortunately her husband, who survived a very bad case of cancer, she had to look after him and never went down that road, so that one's still open. But just to give you an idea of what some researchers and authors do at some point, but they make in megabucks. Okay, so these are talked about some of the publications. These are sort of 3 publications we're involved in. I've got this one here with me today. I've got a couple of spare copies. I haven't got any of these. They've all been sold. You can still get them on Amazon. I don't get anything out of them now. They're just being bought up by companies and they sell them off. Volume 1 is all about partly what I'm going to talk about tonight. Volume 2 is more about the Sphinx and how that's related to the Giza Plateau. Basically, the information I'm going to give to you is really complex, and it's a lot of it. We need a whole series of presentations over many months. just to talk about 2 or 3 slides I'm giving you. So bear with me, I've got to go right through the whole 20 odd years of research and everything that's happening in past, present and future Egypt. So we'll just have to gloss over and maybe take up 1 or 2 points later on and maybe with some questions. Okay, so those are the 3 main publications, but what I want to do is introduce you to the 3 or 2 main people and 1 extra that actually were involved in the very early work long before I came around in 898. Jan Wirth, he died about 6 years ago. He was a diving officer for the Canadian government until some years ago, originally from Czechoslovakia, but he lived in Canada most of his life. He's been in 18 Who's Who books. He was nominated for the most accomplished man, the Guinness most accomplished man back in the 80s. And he's got God knows how many degrees and PhDs. He was an inventor, he was a psychic. In fact, Jan is attributed to the only referenced psychic filmed ability. He was 400 miles away when he moved a feather in a bell jar in a university laboratory. But I don't know how he did that, but it was all under. That was the only official one, and he had the biggest library of psychic books in the world. Unfortunately, he passed away 9 years ago. Now it just seems like yesterday. So he is one of our main thrust researchers, and he came up with some of these many ideas. Jim was originally a sniper in the Vietnam War. He was badly injured, but he recovered, but he was given bad blood and ended up in hepatitis and died in 2009. All between a year or so each other. And he's responsible for, he spent his whole life trying to analyse the book of Exodus and Genesis. I'll come on to that later, but bear in mind, if you think of the books of Genesis as a more of a genetics rather than a sort of biblical or religious text, and Exodus as a science book or physics, then you might be getting near to what we're going to talk about tonight. And then you might have heard this guy, Peter. He was a spy during just after the war. He worked for the OSSS in Rome, and he's one of the best occult selling authors. He wrote The Secret Life of Plants, some of you may have read that, and Secrets of the Great Pyramids and Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramid. So another great guy who died, I think about eight years ago, something like that, I think, unfortunately. So they've all gone down to the wayside now. So I'm just left carrying the can, as it were. Okay, well, let's take a little talk, walk and talk through parts of the pyramid sites. In our quest for these, we call it a quest originally, in our quest for what was to understand the Giza Plateau, you've got to analyse and go to other sites. This is traditionally, according to academics, the step pyramid of Djoser is supposed to be the first pyramid ever built, purely because it's based on the idea of mastabas, which are burial mounds, are being placed one on top of the other. So that's why it's called a step pyramid. So you put one mastaba on another. It's not made of granite or limestone like the pyramids in Giza. It's made of mud brick, so that's why it's not in such a good reclamation order, as it were. But we think that was probably fourth or fifth to be built, if that. And bear in mind that what you see on the Giza Plateau is not the original one. This probably was built 4,800 years ago, maybe 5,000. No one's incredibly sure, but it's built on a much older site, and Jim and Jan think it's at least 50,000 years old. And we'll come on to that, why they think that is later as well. I'm just going to give you a little introduction. The Mayadun pyramid in the Mayadun area, which used to be, along with the Red Pyramid and the Bent Pyramid, an area that was, until about 2002, was military owned, controlled. So you wouldn't be able to go up to these buildings at all until about 2003, 2004. The pictures I took there were 2005, the first time I went to that site. It was very difficult to get there. You had to have special permissions, otherwise no normal tourists would be able to go to these sites. And this is the Bent Pyramid, again on the Dasher ex-military site near the Meidum. So-called because they sort of worked halfway up and they cut at a different angle. Maybe they thought it was too an acute angle and bent it over a bit, but no one really knows for sure. And this is the Bent Pyramid here. You can see it's badly damaged on these corners. And again, limestone cover is partly in place. A lot of damage to the limestone bricks here. And this is the Red Pyramid, the third largest after the Giza one, Sneferu, around about 2600 BC. So 4,500 years old. Yeah, like the Great Pyramid, the entrance is up in the middle there. But again, there's nothing being found in there, not in that one. Meidum, there was supposedly something there, but not as a coffer or anything like the Great Pyramid. This is me ambling down. It goes all the way down, right down, well below. Very stuffy, very hot. It takes about a quarter of an hour to climb down there. And you can see it's all made of cut limestone, all the way right channel, all the way down into a cave system. And there's one Habasur, very badly decomposed pyramids on the site south of Cairo, north of the Giza Plateau. These are after the revolution, these are badly damaged, and there was a lot of looting going on around many sites, and this one actually was a case in question. A lot of stuff went missing. Even the military and the police took quite a bit of stuff. And of course we have these unusual pyramids down in Sudan. So a bit of shoot down there to have a look at those to see what's going on down there. And the famous ones, of course, Yucatan, and there's one in Mexico, the Tutankhamun as well. Now this is an interesting one. I've got a satellite image. This is of the Giza Plateau. Does anyone know a similar layout where this is? Anyone recognise that one? It's I've turned it around because it's more south. You've got the layout of the Giza Plateau. This is in China. It's they weren't discovered until late 40s when the military were flying over and discovered that these extra pyramids. These, unlike the stone-worked pyramids, are mainly mud brick and some stone on the base. Supposedly there was some kind of dynasty burial under one of them, but we don't know, because being in China, not much information is coming out from that area. But just to show you that it's not just the Giza Plateau in Egypt that's got these pyramids, they're dotted everywhere. There's even some in Europe now. And this particular layout is very, very similar, but no one's actually gone into the astronomical alignment of the Chinese pyramids, as far as I know. So many pyramid sites to look at. So we're heading off now into the desert. We were told that there was a early Coptic Christian cave site that was an area in the 4th century where 4,000 monks lived. And the modern monks who'd been living there, copying their sort of distant relatives, as it were, in the 4th and 5th century, were living in caves in Wadi Rayyan, not far from this area. And they had told us some interesting stories via a bishop I know in Cairo, that there were 1 or 2 pyramids buried in sand out in the desert, where hardly only a few itinerant Egyptians go, and where military exercises occur, but no one actually walks on foot. So we had to go, we had this message, so we were in Cairo, we met up with a few people and got my colleagues together. We shot off for a week, 10 days into the desert. And we stayed in one particular, on the edge of Fayoum, near the town. There's a very large nunnery and Coptic monastery. And the police picked us up there and followed us all the way 100 miles into the desert. This is a military van. These are our 2 4x4s. And we just couldn't get a shot of them. And the time we got onto there's a nature reserve area before you get into the desert. And then we had the secret police pick us up. They call them the Galabea police, because they wear long galabeas, but we all know who they are. And these guys then left us, and the secret police then, they call them, sort of followed us to the caves and stayed with us all week. Fortunately, they didn't tend to get up very early, and they thought we'd be doing some unusual work after dark, but we finished all our work by 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoons, by which time they were getting up. So that worked out pretty well. They couldn't come into the desert. They didn't have actually any transport, so we managed to escape them for a while. But we just couldn't get rid of these guys. We even paid one or two off, and they still kept on following us. So this is the issue in Egypt. You're followed, and you've got to pay backsheesh everywhere. It's very difficult to get things done. And incidentally, we were there unofficially. Whatever we found and whatever we photographed, we weren't supposed to bring out. So we couldn't bring any of the finds we did find, which were a few, we couldn't bring out with us. We left them with the cops, Coptic monks. So this is the area we stayed at since the sunrise one morning. It is a desert area, but you get a lot of shale in the desert as well as sand. Very high plateaus, about 500, 600 feet. And from where I'm standing here behind me, until 2002 was the turning point of the Dakar Rally in the Egyptian area. The sticks and the markers are stood up there for the turnaround point. But the cops complained to the bishop complained to the Coptic Pope, and they managed to stop the Dakar in that area since 2002, because he said he was interrupting their prayers, so they managed to get away with that one. So this is the area we're looking at. We were told that from this point, the hidden pyramid was about 2 miles from here, but unfortunately there was a massive sandstorm. This is the area that we stayed at. It was about an hour's drive from here. And this is the sort of accommodation. It was a cave with a window cut out, and I think we had a rat for company, which is quite unusual. And then off we go on treks. But it was the day we chose to go, there was a massive sandstorm, and in this part of the desert, one day it's flat, and the next day is a 40-foot sand dune, and that's the way it is. This is the site of a 4th century monastery, which was about an hour's drive from the 2 pyramids we went to look at. In the 4th and 5th, 6th century, there were 3,000 to 5,000 monks living there at the time. Although up till about 300-400, the Romans ousted quite a few of them. There's a lot of Roman burials in this area too. And this is the garden they made up. This is me showing them. They were showing me what they were growing. So this is like in the middle of nowhere. They've grown up these date palms for protection, and they solely lived on their own growing ability. This is an unusual, in the distance, we had got there and turned right, half an hour drive down is where the pyramid is site. We actually found it, but we couldn't get very near it. This is 300 or 400 feet up, And in this area here is a cave, and we went up the cave and found these bones, animal and human bones, and interestingly, one of them had a hypostyle. This is a horse's hoof, and on it is an iron, which we think is about 2,000 years old, an iron hypostyle. The Romans used normally leather ones to get the horses can go through the sand. It's very unusual to see an iron one. And bear in mind that it is 400 feet up from the base of the desert. And a very narrow opening. We think an animal like a desert fox, or we do get large desert cats, may have taken it up in the past and sort of devoured the remains of the body. We also found a skull. Richard and my colleagues, one of the monks. So there's a lot of burials in there, Roman, Coptic, and many other type of burials. But we couldn't bring any information or any artifacts back with us because we weren't supposed to be there in the first place. So this is our little camping area for the week, and we were shooting off daily while just up in the caves on the right with the secret police. And this is not far, 10-minute walk from here, we discovered where the site of the lost pyramid, as it was. And, but we couldn't get the vehicles over because this 40-foot, I think, this suddenly appeared. One of the monks went out 2 days before, it was all clear. And then the next day, it was 40, 50 foot at least, I think maybe more, the sand dune appeared. And it was behind this sand dune that we found the covered pyramid. Unfortunately, we were going to, when we got to the top of the sand dune, we could see it about a kilometre away. Two highly defined pyramids, never been recorded or seen before. Windswept, most of them, the sand 2/3 the way up. And probably, looking down level with it, must be about 200 feet high. And then all of a sudden, the military aircraft started flying on their training exercise below us, sort of below the level of the pyramid as well. So we were scuppered there, we couldn't move at all. We weren't supposed to be in that area either. It's a very unusual area, it's very unusual rock weathering due to the winds. And this is the big boss. He's unfortunately died now, I think, but he was a guy in charge of everywhere. And these are little caves that we stayed in. But it was an interesting experience, and just showing you what lengths we go to try and fathom out all the answers to why all these pyramids were built, particularly in the locations they are. These are the secret police. They call them Galileo police. They were the Galileans. They must have found it very boring that week following us because they didn't actually follow us at all. But they're very difficult. You can't do anything in Egypt at all. It's gone even worse now since the revolution. So they kept following us everywhere. And that was on the way out. So these guys, they wait 12, 14 hours for one bus that comes along every 24 hours. I think they'd have a field day down here. Well, let's go back to our remaining tensions then. It's the Giza plateau again. We've got that is the second pyramid of Khafra. This is the main one we're talking about, the Great Pyramid of Khufu and Menkora. And as you can see, Menkora's got 3 satellite pyramids, and the Khafra did have some, they eroded quite badly, and the 3 pyramids, Queen's Pyramids they call them, you can still see them up on the Great Pyramid itself. And this is a picture taken from another aircraft of the USAF around about 1946, 47, when they were taking aerial photographs. And there's the Great Pyramid. These are all sort of working areas when I'm going to, I can tell you now that people ask me, well, who built the pyramids? I don't know, where'd that come from? Well, who built the pyramids? Well, basically, we built the pyramids, but with some highly advanced technology that is non-existent in the present terms as we understand it. What we discovered was, according to Jan, 18A, who was in 18 Who's Who books, and a colleague of ours that was in the CIA. And if you remember, I gave a talk about the solar anomalies, and I mentioned the Learjet Foundation. And John, the son of the father who actually pilots, has got a lot of interest in ufology. And we were in touch with him in Canada many years ago, and he used to fly the CIA back and forth to various parts of America and Canada and various other parts of the world in the Learjets. And he was told that, this is all connects with what I'm going to talk to you about, he was told that 50,000 years ago, part of Mars was being lived on. And we were there, we had a sort of a cultural community in parts, until that, I don't know if you notice Mars, there's a long slash on the side of it, and partly is due to a massive incoming asteroid hit. They said it was about 50, maybe 55,000 years, but give or take 1,000 years or two. And because of that, we had some of the people living on Mars had to come to Earth. Meanwhile, on Earth, we still had developing Homo erectus, Homo sapiens, and various animal life living on Earth as it was. And the idea, so we were told, and so we discovered later, that the building of these main sighting of these astronomical sighting of these pyramids were in fact as a transmitter and receiver, and then later used as some kind of ceremonial use much later on in sort of early Egyptian life. So I'm going to look at that later on, but I want you to explain that in the first place, that we as humans built them, but we weren't living on Earth when we originally built them. However, what you see today was finished off by about 5,000–6,000 years ago by us again. But with the technology used to build the internal sections has now been lost. So that's just, it was originally a theory, but it's had a lot of following. We wrote up in our book in 2001 and a lot of feedback about that. So going back to our well-constructed pyramids, these play an important part as well. I want to come and, as we go through the evening, I want to show you our past discoveries and the current ones last year, which are supposed to be new inverted commas, but in fact they're old discoveries, and what we may find in the future, because there's still a lot of stuff that we don't know about. Close up there you can see the concavity on each side of the Great Pyramid. And it's very, very close to, people think it's out in the desert, where it is one side, but if you turn around, you can see all the Quantum Hills and Cairo, the main city blocks, not far away, and encroaching rapidly. This is a part of a wall they built about 2004 to keep, to try and retain the stability inside the Giza Plateau. And here's the wall. It goes 16 kilometers all the way around the site. They even knocked down villages in Nazareth and moved the people to slum areas where they've been living for hundreds of years. There's a lot of trouble about that. The wall is about 15–16 foot high, and the idea is they want to control the vendors, the people who sell things, and control the people who are coming in. By the way, the site shuts at 3 o'clock. We were lucky, Zahir Was, who used to be the director of the Giza Plateau until about 14 years ago. Then he went on to be the director of antiquities of the government. Not a very well-liked man, and you always see him on TV with his blue shirt and hat. spouting off some rubbish, but we had a lot of run-ins with him. But we were lucky to get inside on several occasions when he was lecturing in America, because we knew one or two of the inspectors. So this is Khafra, the second one, and it's always shown a lot, as I said, because it looks prettier than the Great Pyramid for some reason. We think that the capstone on the Great Pyramid there was one in place at one time, but now buried. It's a big thing. It's like finding Alexander's tomb. We're all looking for that tomb, but and we're all looking for the capstone, never to be found. And this, of course, is the Sphinx, right in front of this on the other side. It is a sort of a causeway all the way up. It's a huge, very impressive when you get there. And there's Khafra, and there's Sphinx. And I've got there's a DVD there. We gave a talk some years ago about, there's a lot of people talk about the lost tomb and the Hall of Records under the right paw of the Sphinx. Well, according to Jim and our work in 98, 99 and 2000, it certainly was supposedly under the right paw of the Sphinx, but some kilometres away, as it was an astronomical alignment. You've heard of the as above, as below. If you line up this particular lineup with the Sphinx, it's quite complicated. It's all in my DVD, but it's too complicated tonight. It'll take me about an hour to try and explain to you. But when you turn the astronomical alignment upside down and aligns with the three pyramids, also the causeway and the two temples and the Sphinx, then it forms a star chart which shadows onto an area about 10 square kilometres. And the right paw marks a spot which people are now been trying, where there's a tunnel just sort of north of Cairo. It was looked into, but it seems to, that theory and the work seems to have stopped for the time being. But interesting, it should be looked into more, I think. And another Sphinx was found buried as well, but that's got to be looked at into further detail. I haven't heard any more news about that. On the plateau is covered, it's Syria limestone, most of it, and it's actually covered underneath with caves, cavities, cave systems. And I want to show you what occurred in 99 when they found the Osiris shaft. This is my colleague's footage to show you the size. You can pop down in it. They're often like 30, 40 foot down, and there's a lot of water below as well. Suppose they reckon the water was for drinking area, like large lake well drinking areas in ancient Egypt. But one site they uncovered, it was so large that they had to use a Zodiac inshore boat to get from one end to the other. Other people working on the ideas of what the pyramids are is a colleague of mine who's actually in Egypt at the moment, Christopher Dunn. He's written these two books. It's well worth having a read or getting from the library. He worked a lot on the technologies used in constructing the pyramid and on the coffer, sarcophagus inside the pyramid. He reckons, for example, he spent many hours looking at the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, and came to the conclusion as a scientist and engineer that there's no way you can hand cut that red granite and make stakes going down 3 inches, because if you had a handsaw, then you would stop. If you were cutting and made a mistake in a particular point, you would stop and it would probably only go ½ centimetre. The cuts he's looked at go way down several inches, 3 to 4 inches, which means some kind of machine that we don't know of actually constructed that sarcophagus and maybe constructed the rest of the pyramid. So interesting if you ever get a chance to try and look at those books. What time do you want to stop? 9 o'clock?
About 9ish.
Okay. I just want the next 5-10 minutes, before I want to get on, I just want to give you this introduction, then we look at it in more detail, who and why built the pyramids after the break. But to give you some idea, the Great Pyramid of Khufu alone is said to have 2,300,000 blocks, weighing from 2 to 30 tons. Now you try and move in even a couple of tons, let alone 30 tons, how was that constructed? And some of the inner ones are over 50 tons. And the internal ones are pure white granite, really huge. The pyramid on Menkaure, the smaller one, and the two colleagues of him, if you like, are supposed to be aligned with the constellation of Orion. However, there's a slight overbearing of that alignment, and I think it doesn't work out exactly. You have to take into account not just the three pyramids, because they weren't just built on their own. They were built with temples and causeways and chapels, and you all have to take these into consideration when you're doing these as above as below alignment. The interior temperature of the Great Pyramid is said to be 20 degrees Celsius. In the inner chamber, the king's chamber, where the sarcophagus is, where the red granite is, it was often used as a frequency chamber and used in music to get the correct pitch and tone. Unfortunately, as I'll show you later, when Zahi was there, when Jim explained to him in 98 and 99 how to access this room below the chamber, which Hawass was hell-bent on, because he knew of and was interested in the Hall of Records, but publicly didn't transpose that idea, but he was very keen on him finding it. He was very friendly with the president of Egypt at the time and his brother, and his sort of cronies hanged out at the local club, along with that famous Egyptian actor who died recently. They all used to go to the same gambling and drinking dens. So the idea of the Hall of Records and these other chambers, he was interested in and went to great lengths to try and find out how to get to them. And Jim showed him I'll show you the facts later, but I wanted to mention, because of that, he tried to go the wrong way and made holes in the chamber itself, which wasn't the point. The point you get through from the Grand Gallery, and I'll show you pictures later. And he altered the whole frequency of the chamber, the whole purpose of what it was constructed for. And he put in, later then, he put in air vents and AC and various cameras, because you're not allowed to go in there or take any equipment. We were lucky we went when he wasn't there. And so he altered the whole frequency, the whole pitch of the whole chamber itself. And the other thing, on the outside, this is the Great Pyramid here, on the outside, all the old covering has now been taken away. Around about the 13th and 14th century, there were some large earthquakes in Egypt, in Cairo, and a lot of the Muslim leaders told all the Fekels guys to strip all the external limestone blocks to repair the mosques in Cairo. There are still a few around, but if you go to Meidum, they're still there. This is some miles away in the old Dasher area. You can still see these here. So you can imagine the whole of this pyramid covered in these glistening limestone blocks. It must have been quite a sight at the time. And of course there were supposedly hieroglyphs written on them as well, but no one's seen them, so we don't really know. The only way to do that was to go and disassemble a mosque in Cairo, and I don't think that's going to happen any day soon. This is, that's the Khafra, and that's Khafra, the Great Pyramid, which now you cannot see, because everybody, you've heard of the Sonedum, the Sound and Light show in Egypt. They have a historical hours show where they shone laser lights, and you can all pay $20 and go and look at it. But a lot of the locals used to go to the Pizza Hut, which is here, and another picture there. And you could sit in Pizza Hut, this is where I took the picture in 2004, 2005, and you can actually see the light show, and in the cafe next door. But now, I haven't got a picture of it, but now they built a wall all the way up here with advertising hoardings, so you can no longer see the Sound of Light show. But if you go next door and ask the manager, you can sit on the terrace roof and have a look. So that's where all the local people used to go. Now the interesting thing about, I'm showing you this picture, is a little sort of roundabout, as it were, here, and there are a number of old ancient tree stumps, around about 2 million years old, and they've all you can go around and ping them with a hammer, you know, they ping like anything. So now where did they come from? Well, we think that, like Swansea Bay, part of this area was quite forested at one time. There's also a lot of, and of course then covered in sea, because there's a lot of blocks you see there with a lot of fossils, sea marine mollusks and fossils in the rocks themselves, and they were used again in the making of the pyramids. So interesting. So I think we'll take a quick break, but I want to remind you what we're going to look at next. Now look, this is the inside of the pyramid. This is the original well. They think that originally the well was used as a level to construct this. Originally, I'm talking about the old original, not the new 5,000-year-old one. And there's a secret, well not so secret now, we found it, chamber going down here, which meets another cavity, which then, that cavity in turn meets the 3 satellite pyramids, the Queen's pyramids I told you about, and there's access under there through to this new chamber here, which they suddenly discovered in Egypt. It was in the news about 4, 5, 6 months ago. But I don't know why it hadn't been reported. We already said in 2001 in our books that we already discovered that. And it was already on the internet. Other people had discovered it before us. There was something else. The Japanese discovered it in the 80s, and the French discovered it before them. Okay, thanks very much. Now we get down to the real nitty-gritty, what we're here tonight, I think. I had to give you that general sort of introduction, just to show you what we were up against and what we were doing and how we got to this point. So let's remind ourselves where we're going. I want someone to remind me later on. We'll talk more about this Mars and the moon towing into position later on about pyramids. I think I mentioned it once in the solar anomaly talk. We want to look at this new discovery, so-called, above the Grand Gallery, how that appeared, how we found it, and how do you get at it. Okay, so the entrance to the Great Pyramid is this little rough, you have to bend down to get here. It's about quarter way up on the front of on the sides. And that was made in the about 12th century by a couple of locals. I thought there was prizes they could get and gold, but they got in there, blew it up and found there was nothing but bats flying around. And again in Weiss in the 1890s he used gunpowder to do various things in the chamber and ruin a few things. But anyhow, you go down here, down a number of steps, you come to what they call the Grand Gallery. Now this is a corbel gallery. It goes way up, and gets narrower and narrower at the top. And then it goes a level and down to the Queen's chamber and then up to the King's chamber. The Queen's chamber was shut for some years, but it's back open again now. But our interest, of course, is in the King's chamber. This is the end of the Grand Gallery. It goes way up about 80-90 feet. And this is an important area to remind ourselves later of the access to the 2 chambers, above and below chambers. You get through one of these corbels here. There's me in the King's chamber. You can see it being cut away. And this is the coffer that I mentioned that Chris Dunn was working on to show that it couldn't have been made by hand, it must be made by some kind of machine. And if you look on the inside, I think I may have them, yeah, if you look on the inside, not so well here, but there are, under here, there's some accidental cuts. If you like, a machine has gone in and made a wrong cut and come out again, and it's gone right down several inches, sometimes 3 or 4 inches. This, a friend of ours in '98, Jim Branson, he was a physicist. He supposedly worked for the CIA. He told me he was an ex-CIA physicist. I said, is there such a thing as an ex-CIA? And he worked on this coffer model. I got the 8-page, if anyone's really interested in the maths and physics. But he worked for months on, he's a physicist and mathematician. He worked on all these angles of the sarcophagus, and he came to the conclusion that the total formula at the end was equivalent to the speed of light. So what does that mean in real terms? I mean, originally I wasn't quite aware of what that meant, but he seems to think, and Jim and Jan, when they were alive, said that explains it quite well, that the speed of light and the acoustic ability in the King's Chamber helped towards some kind of initiation ceremony, that you could transpose maybe your mind and body to some place out in the distant stars. And that's why I think basically Jim was thinking more of a psychic thing rather than a physical thing. So this coffer, which has never held a dead body, we think may have been some kind of ceremonial initiation for this speed of light process. And then Richard, a colleague of ours, one of course Hawass was in America, we tried this system, and he laid down and did some mantras while I waited outside the entrance. And within about 30 seconds, the sound started getting louder and louder and louder, and all of a sudden we had guards came running down the Grand Gallery in the chamber, handguns waving. Apparently it was so loud it went out to the outside and boomed all the way up top of Giza Plateau, because our colleagues are outside wondering what the heck was going on. So obviously it was, the frequency is still there, but not as powerful as it used to be. This is Jan when he was in his 20s, I think about 1972, 71, something like that. And he was doing, he's the only one who's done this experiment, and I've got the only copy of the audio. He had a couple of gaffers come in, and he had a wooden paddle, and he wound the paddle with a galabert cloth and banged it on every one of the red granite blocks. And as you can see, there was no, you couldn't get a razor blade between these cracks. And they weren't filled, they were so tightly made, so exact. I mean, you couldn't do that today. And using the paddle, he spent hours, and he spent 2 nights in there, banging and banging, to show and demonstrate that the frequency was the same all the way around, including the floor. But now, of course, it's changed. Because Hawass has dug it up after this, as Jim was given the free range in '99 to go around and show him where you can access. But he went and dug in the wrong place, Hawass this is, dug a hole there and altered the frequency, put in a few fans and other electrical devices which also altered the frequency. You can see how tightly knit these huge granite blocks were. So it was used a long time ago for people used to hire out, pay lots of money to go and tune certain musical instruments. There was also a story that came my way in 1999, 2000. Someone sent me a Russian audio engineering booklet in English. It was taken to American, translated in English. And I said, why are they sending me this? And the note was, read paragraph wherever it was. It's related to sound experiments in the Great Pyramid in the late or mid-90s. These two Russian audio engineers wanted somewhere they could experiment doing sine waves experiment in a completely soundproof environment somewhere like the Great Pyramid. So they hired, the Russian government gave them the funding, they hired for that afternoon the King's Chamber. There was no one in the chamber at all, with no guards, no public, it was all shut down. And they did their audio experiments. When they got back to the laboratory in Moscow, they actually ran them in the laboratory and they heard extra sounds. So they took out these extra sounds and analysed them, and they said to them it sounded like chanting. So they didn't know what they were and how could they have got there. Were the people somewhere else? They don't think so. So they sent it to one of their colleagues who enhanced the sound, and they've discovered it was some kind of ancient language. So they passed it on in turn to the local Egyptian specialist, who said, well, although ancient Egyptian language has never been spoken, it sounded like or an even more ancient language. It sounded though it was a chanting in some kind of initiation ceremony. So why or how did that sound appear or get to on their recordings in the King's Chamber? The conclusion was that this red granite had particular properties, and one of the known properties of granite, of course, is radon gas, and the properties of attracting magnetic and resonance frequency waves like sound. Why would it come up in that particular instance, I don't know. Whether it was the machinery that they were using to record, it picked it up. Bizarre, I know, but it's in that particular journal, and it was quite interesting reading. Of course, it wasn't their main thrust of the experiments, it was a by the way, or we listened to this and found this. But it sounded intriguing. So it certainly goes towards the idea of this speed of light initiation ceremony. Anyway, that's by the way. We're going back and to look at the new findings, of the so-called. They call it the secret room, and they found it, they supposedly above the Grand Gallery here. This is last year. And you can see they've got little shape there, where it's an elongated shape. This is the new secret room, supposedly, and this is the Grand Gallery. Using this new muon radiography technique that uses the cosmic rays to detect cavities and chambers in structures such as the Great Pyramid, they said that this is brand new, exciting, innovative discovery. And they think that the corridor above it 100 feet long. Let's have a look, remind ourselves, on our book, we wrote in 1999 but published in 2000-2001, we said, lo and behold, there's a long secret room which we think is used for some part of that initiation ceremony, or holding bay for something or other, we don't really know. At the time, we needed more investigation. These are our diagrams in our book, and this is how we came to this by cross-referencing the information in Genesis. I'll explain later how we got to that. And using the mathematical modes that were available, we came across that there should be, and there was, a chamber above the Grand Gallery. This famous Ikram woman, Egyptologist at the American University in Cairo, said that this void, as they call it, the chamber, is directly above the Grand Gallery and might imply its involvement in the corridor's construction. Well, that is true. That's the only thing that that's what we came across originally. She said, I don't think it's ever too early to speculate, but we might be widely wrong. But we already said that in 2001. Time will tell, she says. Well, let's see what Hawass says. The only thing he said right is, yes, it's not new. But he didn't really know, because Jim told him that back in '98. This is in November in 2017. It was announced on Thursday a passenger plane-sized void was discovered in the middle of the Great Pyramid, at least 30 meters long. He said that another scientist from the Scan Pyramids, it's this new organization, they've got Scan Pyramids, scanning the pyramids project all the time. And he said there was nothing new about discovery. However, he didn't say any more about that because he didn't know about the information. Well, let's go back a bit. In 1987, in the Science and Medicine journal, Japanese find new cavities in the Cheops, that's a Greek name for Khufu, in the Great Pyramid, September 28, 1987, from Reuters news agency. Japanese experts believe they have found previously undetected cavities inside the 4,600-year-old pyramid of Cheops, a possible discovery that would further challenge the long-held belief the Great Pyramid is filled mostly with stones. And he goes on to say, we believe the pyramid is more space than people think. In 1986, a year before that, French researchers also found, they believe, what were 3 cavities in the pyramid of Cheops. But now this is the important thing, and I don't know why none of this came up last year when they were doing the muon experiments. The important point is that the French and the Japanese worked together later, but after drilling holes through the interior wall, this is in the Grand Gallery, scientists suspended exploration because the effort turned up only sand instead of pharaonic treasures. I'll explain why the sand is there, and it's an important part of how it balances the circuit to get into the secret room below as well as above. This is the facts in reply from Jim in '98, December, to Zahi, who was director of the Giza Pyramids at the time. When I met with you in your office, November the 28th, we discussed the possibility of vacation Hall of Records. After which he granted permission to enter Cheops. I've subsequently been instructed to inform you the proper way to gain access to the point you are leading as follows. But Zahi didn't follow the exact instructions. In the Grand Gallery, the 25th mortise, coming back from the Great Step on each side, beneath that point, precedes the entrance to the Queen's Passage. That's on the way up towards the King's Chamber. There are 2 small niches. These must be chiselled into until you reach a space which a rock has been placed. On each side of the Grand Gallery, these rocks are pushed outward and will fall into place. Once in place, they will create an opening beneath the ledges from which sun, on which the 2 ledges are held in place by and rest, will be released into the 2 compartments on the other side of the gallery. So you can imagine the sand is being tilted, the block is being lifted up as the weight goes down and causes another opening to occur. Once the sand has been drained, the 2 ledges then may be levered, releasing the stone, exposing a passageway. Now he was explaining all this, but what happened, whether they went into it and never said anything, I don't know. But this was what we talked about in 98, 99, and no, it's nothing new at all. So we're talking about the ledge here, and in our books, as I say, it's so complicated, it takes hours to explain, but these ledges have got square stones, which can slide down through another long stone itself, elongate like a timber frame, and they all bang up down the middle, if you like. They all go through one hole and end up down the middle, raising one end up. So you've got access down below and access above. I mean, it was in our books, and you only have to look at it in 2001 to find out how to do that, and yet all this is new discoveries. Jim called it the chamber below, the crystal. he thinks that there's a huge, large crystal deposited in that void in the lower chamber. And one of the ideas of this chamber, this crystal, it's a huge, very, very big, I'm not quite sure what size he imagined, but I think you're talking 30, 40 meters in size. The idea is that a lot of the sites around the world, in China, the ones I showed you, in Mexico, and in the Holy Lands, all these large sites are usually located 90% of the time and more on unusual crust activity, like earthquake-prone areas. And on each of these sites, the theory is, and I think maybe more the theory, that these crystals were placed below each of these particular monuments so that they all connected up like the geonode you find across the Earth. So everywhere you crisscross there's a main geonode, then you get that energy vortex, if you like. So producing a main energy vortex itself. And this is why we come back to the Mars connection. When it was built and Earth was tilted out of sort of orbit, Mars rather, they've towed in the moon, believe it or not, according to the CIA and John Lear, who was told 50, 60,000 years ago, they brought the moon in to balance out the orbital part of the Earth. So that was the connection there, and these crystals were used to counterbalance the energies around on these geonodes. There was a Australian or New Zealand pilot who died about 8 years ago. I can't think of his name. He wrote the Harmonics series of books. Can you remember his name? I can't think of it. But he discovered that when he used to fly with his old planes in the late 50s and 60s, every time he went over one of these crystal energized portal areas, all his machinery, his equipment in the plane would go haywire. So after a few years, he mapped all these out, and he created this network of geonodes around the planet. The American government even grabbed hold of him because he said that on each one of these major crossover points on the node, if you explode a nuclear device, the energy in that area would make it 4 or 5 times stronger than normal. And of course the CIA and NSA picked him up straight away. And he was interred for about 2 months, I think, and he wrote a book about it. And he gave a model of this. His name will come to me, and I can't think of his name. We were in touch with him years ago. So that sort of gives you some idea about why some of these ancient sites are sited where they are. So another point is, according to Jim and Jan's theory, is that these 3 satellite or Queen's pyramids have got under there, you can access and go under to this other void under the Grand Gallery. The middle pyramid of these 3 lies on the line which precedes the Chamber of the Covenant. He's called it the Chamber of the Covenant. And another point is, when he analysed the book, we'll look at the book of Genesis and Exodus very briefly in a second, but if you turn the books of Genesis and Exodus into books of numbers, science and genetics, you begin to see what actually it's written about. It's not a religious text, it's more of a dynasty text, where we came from, what we were doing here. It's not a code, it's just a hidden translation. And the books, the Bible books that we used were the revised edition of the New American Standard, 958, where 50 clerics got together from different denominations and wrote the New American Standard Bible. And it's completely different from reading the King James Version. Try and look it up on there's Bible online gateway, you can look at all the books. So he was explaining you can access via under this as well, under these. And then this explains what I've just actually tried to explain to you. A continuous down pressure from these wedges causes the rock to fall at the end of each wedge and subsequently fall out. And as these rocks fall, so does a layer of sand. So we go back to the French and Japanese. They found the sand but didn't know what it was for, and then plugged it back up again. If it had kept it on running, they might have seen or heard what was going on. The structure is composed of 11 rocks, but they won't all move themselves. A few of them on the top walkway will fall to expose the entrance to the passageway. That's the lower passageway. And there are at least 7 other rocks beneath that walkway under the grand area I showed you, like a girdle stone. So it's a highly complicated system inside that. And Great Pyramid. And here's what I was trying to explain to you, that these are actually holes through these main stones, so you get another portway of stone going through, so when the sand goes down, these all fly through here and cause this sort of movement downwards. So once the mechanism is in place, sand is poured in, allowing the massive weight of the ledge to rest. So that's how they actually constructed it. They sort of filled it up with sand to one side to balance out the weight. So it was something that still needs to be discovered. unless they have and haven't told us. I don't know. Before we go on to show you how I hate this word decoded, or deciphered might be a better way, of the book of Genesis and how we came to this conclusion. I just want to take a little 5 minutes to show you what happened in 1999. There was a discovery, a vast study, he discovered it, but it was already there, a 100-foot shaft. It was called the Tomb of Osiris. Under Khafra, the middle one, if some people may remember, it was all on the news. It was a contrived National Geographic live opening. Hamas got tens of thousands of dollars for it. But when you actually he showed the official photographs, everything was laid out as though it had been tidily put together over some weeks. But what I've got are some photographs of people who were down there prior to Zahi and during, and took their own photographs. These have never been seen before. I'll show you the official photographs and the unofficial ones. So they discovered it in 1999, but it's been known about, but they didn't know where it was 30, 40 years previously. This is the entrance to it as you see it today. It's got a grill over it now, you can't go down there obviously. It goes down 90 feet. That's the main entrance, and this is what they put down there in 1999 to access it. And this is a diagram to show you all these different levels. We've got there's the shaft A, shaft B, and shaft C, and this is the interesting one, is where there's a huge sarcophagus found down there. This is one more 3D effect. So you come down, go along like a big tunnel, and drop down again. So why did they do that? What was so important that below this, and to go back here, below this, next to the Khufu, the big pyramid, this is the next one. Why did they do that there? What was buried there? This is an unofficial photograph. This is the photograph taken by one of my colleagues. He was one of the first down there, and he took this photograph. It was all full of water. They said it was for drinking water, but I think it was more than that. And he told me that he couldn't get a photograph of it, but one of the, I think I may have it, that's the area, you drop down into that section C, the bottom one. It's getting very rough now. Right, this one. This is the sarcophagus they found. And when he got down there, Another of his friends already gone, he was the second guy to arrive, he'd already gone down there prior to one of the local researchers. He said that when they pushed this stone apart, when he got there was nothing there, but when they pushed this stone apart, he said there was some kind of being with like a reptilian back being buried there, which is quite an interesting thought. And I have got a photograph, I mean, trying to find it before I came tonight, you can see the actual ridge of the reptile's back on the top of the ridge as it was pulled out. Nothing was said about that in the news. This is, there were two so because this is the other one being pulled up and taken to the surface. This is the one that was with the so-called reptilian back top on it. Interesting, profound, we don't know. That's all I know. But this is a rough cave system that goes right further on again. And it's actually, this is where the Osiris shaft is, there you can see that, it goes way down. And the mud tunnel there goes underneath all these, under the causeway and under the temple, 108 feet below. They blocked it all off now, of course. Hamas made a big deal of it and said that, you know, it was all for initiation, so-called Osiris. There was not actually nothing down there. But why go 108 feet down and bury something in a huge granite sarcophagus? This is Richard, a colleague, you saw him lying in the coffer. He was down there, he came on the second day with a colleague who actually went down on the first day, and he drew this unofficial, not the scale, how he saw it and went down. So it's quite interesting. You won't see any of that now in the public domain. Cover that one up. Okay, well let's go, that's an interesting side, but let's go back to how we came to all this. Genesis and Exodus. Think in terms of genetics, physics, mathematics and astronomy. It's a book of science, basically. Now, it's interesting to find out that the lineages, where we came from, tens of thousands of years ago, are actually laid out in the order of the planets, and they're all laid out in mathematical and astronomical terms in the book of Genesis, if you know how to read it. And I'll show you how to do that in a minute, very, very quickly. It's more complicated, but however. You've all heard of Plato, the Greek philosopher. Well, his theory is that, quite well known, 500 BC, he said that Earth is mere part of a template, and someone or some divine being, spiritual being, had this template and went around the universe making planets out of this template. It wasn't far off the truth, really, because the mathematical calculations of all the ages are like Methuselah and his son and his grandson and his son in turn. They deduce, if you reverse the mathematical numbers into degrees, then you will get some idea of a star chart. So let me try and explain it very briefly, if you can follow me. The first ever star is Adam. You've heard of Adam and Eve. So our first major point of origin is Adam. Adam, according to Jan's theory and Jim, is that they weren't names of people, but they were names of planets. It may not have been Adam, but it just as a point of reference. So you have to, like in Stargate film, you have to establish 0 degrees. So you use all the numbers that you see in the ages in the book of Genesis, and you turn it into a 360-degree chart. So you've got an example there. When Adam was 130, he had a son named Seth. Subsequently, he lived, in inverted commas, 800 years. Who lives 800 years? For a total of 930 years. One important point here is the figures 130 and 930. You could triangulate the coordinates from Adam to Seth. Now, I can talk about it, but I think the best thing is for me to give you a sample. Look, here we are, look. There's Adam and there's Seth. So using the 360 degrees, and then going back to their 930, you do the calculation, 130, you do it in degrees, and eventually, as you go through all those elongated, why in Genesis you have all those elongated names and they lived so-and-so and for so many years? Well, this is what it comes down to. It's showing you an astronomical chart. And as you build up the chart, you start getting an astronomical star chart. And this one is called the Methuselah line. All these people related from Adam, Seth, Enosh, Mahal, Jared, these are all sons. And when you actually transpose, there's the Great Pyramid. When you actually transpose out below, as you go through all these names, then you'll get this astronomical alignment. So you can see the complexities. Whoever built, well, let's put it this way. Whoever wrote the book of Exodus, because it's Exodus as well, not just Genesis gives you the mathematical formulas, Exodus gives you the physics. Whoever wrote those two books, especially Exodus, knew how to construct, or knew the construction of the Great Pyramid. When these books were written, we don't know. It could be tens of thousands, we don't know, or it could be carried on. But it was laid out as a sort of a template plan, but somehow it got into these biblical books, and the story retained in that way. Another way to look at that, and we'll go back to that in a minute, is to look at the Genesis connection again. The recurring number set here, you might recognize that number, is the entrance to the Great Pyramid is offset by 3.714285 degrees, as near as that. If you put that back into the Genesis book, all right, and just knock off the 3 for now, but put all these down, these numbers, you put 71427, and then you miss out the next number, 5, and then 5 is the recurring numbers. It's the same number, and you come back to that one, and what you do, you turn these in 30 degrees, because that 30 degrees comes up all the time on the Great Pyramid, and you have a vertical, you get this, which in line, if you go back to this, works out to as below that. In other words, you shoot up, if you like, laser points from these points, and you get these charts, star charts in the heavens. Complicated, I know, but it's something you need to look at. There's the other thing, someone asked me earlier on about Noah's Ark. One of the main theories is either the Great Pyramid inside was either a copy of, or actually was a Noah's Ark. Because if you look at the length of the Noah's Ark, 300 cubits, a cubit is about 18 inches, or 20 inches in some ancient cultures, but it's usually from the middle finger to your elbow. So 300 cubits, and the width was 50, and the height was 30. This is Noah's Ark we're talking about. And Jim wanted to explain that that model is actually integrated within the Great Pyramid. He then goes on to say, in Book of Genesis, you get God created heaven in 6 days. So 6 by 50, which is the 50 degrees that each of those lineages were set at. You work up 300, and then he went the 7th day, rested, 7 by 50, 300, 360 minus 350 is equal to 10, 10 divided by 7, 142857, and we come back to 142857. That's how we calculate back and forth. So it's not just one figure you pick out of a hat. It seems to correlate with the information given in both books, especially the Book of Genesis. The Book of Exodus goes on to explain how the pyramid is built. In about 12 years ago, there was a psychic organisation in Britain that knew all our work and said, would you like to speak to this guy in Mansfield? He left school with 15, couldn't write very well, doesn't know how to draw. He was beaten up, walking down the street one day and went to a coma for 3 weeks. When he came round, he started drawing pyramids and all this information which they couldn't understand. So I went to see him. Jim was in Canada, and he seemed a normal guy, except that he wasn't very well educated, but he was very worried because he didn't know why he was drawing all this stuff. He'd written these things up, like this. He said, I keep seeing a receiver, I keep seeing a sender, receiver. I see bodies in boxes underneath the pyramid. I see planets or asteroids coming down. So, and this is in all our book, this type of writing, which we still really couldn't decipher. It's not hieroglyphics, it's a bit of a mixture of maybe Yucatan, ancient Mexican. But however, I recognise one or two of these, and I think Roswell case, they had a couple of sort of glyphs very similar to that. But we could never fully understand what he was trying to, nor could he. The interesting point was that, do you remember the fire of the castle in the royal castle in off the M4 in London? It went raised to the ground, didn't they? Spent all the money on it. He actually went to the police and said the castle was going to be burnt down this month. And because he'd been having treatment, the police looked his background up and said, oh, he was a raving loony. He kept having this visage that it was going to be burned down. He went to the police 3 times. Eventually, they arrested him, and on the day that the fire actually occurred, and he was held in custody for 2 days until they found out from the surgeon and doctor who was dealing with it. He was actually at an appointment on that day. So I don't know what happened to the guy. When he went, he just couldn't handle all this information. But it's certainly of great use to what we were looking at and what we were trying to... he knew nothing about history. He didn't even know how to write properly. But he had some coloured photographs of the work he was doing, incredible, minute detail. So it's something else to even look at. I'm going to leave it there because I'd like to ask you to ask me questions, because I want to try and explain. I know it's a lot to take in, but as I said, each couple of slides needs an hour's presentation in itself. And it wasn't my original work. I helped to do the editing and the archaeology research and the groundwork. But you can see some sense, as in the 20 years I've been working on that field, no answers in the academic or traditional field come up with, only some of the more alternative ideas which are becoming more acceptable. The ideas we put out in 2001 seemed ridiculous to many, and now they're returning back to our books and looking at these new discoveries. So anyway, thank you for your time. So that's to come on, yeah, can't read them, sorry. Yeah. Well, I know that Jan Murter, he's funny. He's also friends with Yuri Geller when he was young, he was 16, 17. And Jan was invited to NASA because they discovered some signals coming, some old signals. How it emanated, I don't know. It's what Jan told me. And he was invited to NASA to the laboratory because they invited scientists, engineers, psychics who wanted to find out what was going on. And he met Yuri Geller there. In fact, I found him on his Facebook page, so I actually mentioned about Jan. He said, yes, I met him in American NASA. So, I confirmed that. And they were trying to, in front of all these terminals, except Yuri Geller. Because Yuri, when he was 16, had such a propensity affecting terminals, he couldn't set near one, they all went haywire. And we had to insulate some of the work he was doing. Because he seemed to have lost that. As he went older, he seem to have lost it. We had some of these standing food trips and things, you know, but we seem to have lost that originality, that Jan Newing thing. And the idea was they were trying to find the point of origin of these signals. They were coming from Mars, but what or how they were coming from, we don't know. All they know is they're coming from some inside the Mars terrain inside. But what happened, I don't know. They never told the result. So this is back in the 80s. So they must have been going through the further on after that. But that's all I know. I don't know how to work. But I could ask Yuri to see if he found out anything. But I doubt it. So that's the way the other connection. But the idea is that we were in Mars is quite a really common one among certain scientists, alternative people. Look at the African people who've got different circadian rhythm to us. We've got it's a 23 and a half, 24, yeah. So interesting point.
Have you heard if water in the pyramids have any healing qualities?
Any what's the healing qualities?
Healing, yeah.
Well, I know that the crystal gives out healing qualities, which would affect the water.
Yeah.
The idea was apparently it was used for drinking, but it's also used for initiation ceremonies. So it must have been like religious water. So I would imagine so.
Yeah.
How was it mentioned the tomb of Osiris?
Sorry?
Osiris. What was Osiris?
Oh, right,
Known
yes.
as the god of resurrection.
Yes, that's right. Osiris was one of the things. Osiris, the god of resurrection. Yep, and that's an important part of that. And but Zai said it was just initiation. But why bury something 180 feet down in a huge, or two, large coptic? How did they get all that down there? You know, mystery. And who was in it? I don't know. Yeah.
So why do you think the pyramids were built?
Sorry, I have to come around.
Why do you think the pyramids were built?
Why were they built?
Yeah.
Well, I think basically they were built like any other. I thought this one of the main structures were built initially, and all the others followed on suite. But if you look at if you lay out the Earth, I'm not a flat earther, but if you lay out the Earth flat, you'll find it basically right in the middle of the whole terrain of the Earth itself. And so it's got a central structure. But the idea was, like I showed you that psychic, so the sender-receiver idea, I think it was used as a point of reference to balance the Earth. So one of many ideas was why it was built. There's so many things incorporated in that Great Pyramid. It's unbelievable. You could work on it all your life and never come to an exact, meaningful result. But I think it was built there as a central pivot point with a crystal underneath to balance all the other points of reference around the globe. And many other things, like why make something so complex? Why complex structure? Questions? I'd like to know the tools they use to build it. There's if you go to the British Museum, there are some, I think they've taken away now, but they've got a lot of vessels, ancient Egyptian vessels. They say they're 5,000–6,000 years old. And there's some with like pencil thin tops. You can actually lay them, they balance. They don't fall over. It's really thin stem, and it's a big cover, and it just balances. How do they do that? The other thing I forgot to mention, in the Great Pyramid, there's, you remember the Gantum brick? They use a little mini powered robot to go up these openings that go up so-called to the Osiris shafts and up to the stars, supposedly aligned to some of the stars. Well, in one of the shafts, they found two iron pins. Now, even if you go by the traditional theory, it's 4,800 years old, where was the Iron Age? It was only 600 BC. So what was two iron pins, who've never been opened in 4,500 years, what were they doing, and why were they in that little 8-inch elongated shaft? And I've seen the pins. A friend of mine used to be the second in command in the British Museum, and he said, "You want to see something interesting? Come downstairs." Oh, it's not on view to the public because they can't explain why. First question asked, why is an iron pin in a 4,800-year-old point of reference?
Do you know what they were used for?
Sorry?
What were they used for?
Well, they don't know. They think that the pins were used to balance something, and the robot pushed it. They're about 4 or 5 inches long.
It wouldn't be like, do you know where...
But he took them out. The robot picked them out, and the British Museum had them. But they never put them on public display. So I've seen them.
You said iron in my head, it would be like a tuning fork.
Yeah, these two, like nails, but pins for holding.
Like tuning for pinch.
Yeah. And they weren't that big. So they must have been holding something in place. So whether the robot pushed something out of place, I don't know, because these never been entered before. When Ganterbrick used that machine, he was an engineer, you know, it was all in the news at the time. And they actually went ahead and said, "Oh, we found iron pins," but no one really thought, what the heck are they doing now? Where they come from?
So they never put it on display because it didn't fit the...
No, because he told me, he said, "I can't because I can't explain what they're doing there and how would they
So that's
label it." I
yeah,
don't
it's
know.
evidence.
But no one's questioned it. He said they don't question it. You
We rewrite all the history books, isn't it?
know. Yeah.
Iron was used thousands of years before the Iron Age.
But each year they put back, it was 4,400, now it's 4,800 because they found they can carbon date some of the outer blocks where there was some grass or wood used in the mix. Right, so, but they keep throwing it back, so no one really knows. They can't come out, you know, there's lots of academic books written, but you can't turn the turtle, the academia on its head. After all these years, there's so much millions of pounds in funding and research, you know, can't change it.
So you've seen about is this link with Mars from 50,000 years ago?
Ish, give or take, yeah.
What do you think that the pyramids could have been?
I think some, yeah, a lot of these, yeah, it was, I think they were built there.
By us, but from Mars?
Yes, yeah, that's right, yeah.
Do you think any other ET species would have been involved?
Well, apparently, according to Jim and Jan, yes, there were a number came down to help to assist in building this. Because apparently, and according to the CIA and John Mayer, we were involved, but Jim got it from another source of information, not just one point. We were involved, there's a thing in the Bible that said when the world spoke one language, so that everyone on the Tower of Babel. Read that again actually, history book. The idea was that they all came, some stayed because they got used to the environment, and some had to go back because they couldn't get used to the environment. Gases and environment, the air, you know.
You mentioned something about the weighted giants.
Yeah, so I haven't got, I know about it, but I haven't got any evidence. We never looked at that particular one. The ones we did look at were a hoax, so I never really, but there were, we do know someone have excavated some quite tall 8-foot people, but would you consider those giants? I don't know. Interesting point, in talking about China earlier on, there was back about, I still kept the Times supplement about it, 18 years ago, they discovered red-haired, tartan-clad Celtic people buried in China. And I mean, hundreds of people, not just one or two. And they were and these were like 6'6", people not Chinese as we know them. What were they doing there? You know, apparently they then whole cultural artifact system of them. And the only reason they discovered, they were put in a Chinese museum, but wasn't looked at properly. And then when it opened up, when the Asian and Chinese NECROPOLIS closed down and opened up the public, then a couple of archaeologists went and looked and said, what are these, you know? And so there was a big article in Sunday. I've still got the Times supplement on that one. Interesting. And they all had tartan clothes, what was left of them, and all red hair, and tall, quite tall. So, interesting. Yes. Well, the idea is, this is what they were saying, that when this alteration of Mars occurred and had to come on Earth, they had to balance, Earth wasn't in the same orbit, so they had to bring in the Moon to balance up the orbital path. Now if you look at, I mentioned Plato, he talks about a time when in his lifetime there was a group, a cultural group several thousand years ago in his time that recorded there was a time when they remember there's no moon. There's a race of people in South America that have got handed down stories of a time when there's no moon. It's in the Bible that says there's a time when there's no moon. And I think there's that famous science astronomer in the 1950s wrote a couple of books on it as well. I've got a whole section on that, on when all the evidence to show you when at the time when there wasn't a moon. It's all mainly to do with handed down story, but usually by people like Plato and others reference it. He even mentions the name of the cultures that written down the story. It's quite interesting. So,
you also mentioned the Orion's belt based on the pyramids.
yeah.
Could the discrepancy of not matching the star charts because they're so old, the stars?
It's possible, yeah, because we shift. We do shift over thousands and thousands of years, you know. In 50,000 years, it would be slightly different, I would imagine. Another interesting point is that the Nile, they discovered that there's another river underneath the Nile going down hundreds of feet, an ancient river. And they discovered that if you bring that up to the stars, it flows with Uranus. And forget the name, the star chart is related to it. It's the whole star chart that flows with the old river, not the modern river, the old one. It's interesting.
The star chart, the constellation, the star chart, is it actual constellation?
Say again, sorry.
The star chart, you've got the star chart.
Yeah.
I was wondering where it is in the sky, off the sky. The sky, like,
Yes,
off the sky.
Swan.
Cygnus.
Yeah, Cygnus. Yeah, I think it follows that. That. There's so much. I'll have to check my books now on the full details, but there's so much information I can't carry it all in my head. Because I wasn't the original instigator of that. I just edited the practical work.
Any more questions?
Is there any evidence to suggest what sort of crystal would be involved?
Very well,
What type of crystal might be involved?
system.
No, crystal.
Oh, all I know it's a natural crystal, like your normal quartz. Yeah, white crystal. All I know is that a team did go in there, a peak team apparently years ago, and take a chunk out of it, and it caused some problems.
All that sits in complex inside the pyramid, was that being constructed as it was being built upwards?
I think so,
How was it actually made? You know?
Well, yeah, see, if you look in the book of Exodus, I think they describe how the Ark of the Covenant, and it shows you there, actually, if you read it as if it's not the Ark of the Covenant, as it were, it shows you how it was constructed. I'll have to give another talk on that one. It's so complex. But it's if you try to get one of our books or borrow a book from the library, we've explained it in that. But it is quite complicated.
Do you think there's a lot more to be found in that period?
Oh, definitely, yes. I think so. Yeah, we're only scratching the surface. I mean, look at all the stuff we found in the desert. There's loads of stuff.
Is there likely to be a shaft going straight upwards to the peak?
I don't think so. No, it all seems different angles. It all seems to be at 30 and 50 degrees. You know, down. All of it's down below. There's so much stuff down there. They still, as I showed you, they're still finding things. You know, and they're doing work on the Muir and stuff. They're doing in the Valley of the Kings now, finding new tombs. Still looking for Tutankhamun and his mother. Still looking for him.
How many people would have been involved to build that?
Yeah, well, it depends on how. A lot of people say it's slavery, but the slavery in ancient Egypt wasn't a concept. People did it because it was a pharaoh and hoping for greater things. I would imagine it'd be, I mean, in today's terms, several thousand. But with the machines, who knows? I honestly don't know that one. I don't think anybody.
I think there'd be millions of artifacts left behind.
Yeah, there isn't, is there? Though you see, some people say, "Oh, it was slopes and tracks." But where's all the? Where you have to hide all that sand? There's nothing, nowhere to go. And bear in mind the river, but there was water. Even in the 1880s, all the Giza Plateau was water around that area. You can see all the illustrations covered in the water.
Thousands of eating utensils and toilet facility, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Where is it all?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions to finish off? One more?
Do you believe there's a chain by inside the Sphinx?
I'll come over. For years it wasn't.
Do you believe there's a chain by inside the Sphinx? Inside the Sphinx?
Oh, right, yes.
Possible access from the top?
You can, yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, there is, exactly you asked about that. And there is top of the head of the Sphinx, there is actually sort of a channel that goes down. I'm doing it all the way down. There is one, but I haven't seen it. And the Japanese were behind that. But I think it's something like the size of this. But whatever they're doing so much we don't know about. They often cordon everything off for a couple of weeks and unfold it. Difficult to say, really. But certainly it's something unusual there.
Right, you'll put your hands together for Howard Middleton-Jones.